The tour to Israel is one that I wanted to do since I was a young teenager. It was on my bucket list for a long time. We signed up with Latter-day Travel, especially since we found that Bruce Porter was our guide once again. Last year, Julia and I enjoyed Birth of a Nation and Early Church History Tour, sponsored through Latter-day Travel. We were impressed with Bruce. Another personality was an added bonus for the Church History Tour. Bruce Newbold, a filmmaker, actor, producer, and is the online, scripture audio voice for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Bruce Newbold has a vast filmography and has acted in, or helped produce dozens of familiar films. Having him join Bruce Porter as our tour guide duo was awesome. Bruce H. Porter earned degrees in ancient Near Eastern studies with an emphasis in Semitic languages, scripture, the history of religion, and anthropology. Bruce conducted extensive research for the Religious Studies Center on the Pearl of Great Price and the Book of Abraham. He has done research in the major museums and libraries of Europe and the United States. He has also presented and co-authored a number of papers for related professional journals. During his graduate work, he assisted in the research and writing of a documentary on Egyptian archaeology for BBC.
It was one of the greatest civilizations on Earth, but its secrets lay hidden. All that was left of ancient Egypt were the crumbling remains of its stunning monuments. But why they were built and who built them remained a mystery.
Brother Porter is also the author of many books which titles include Prophecies and Promises, The Book of Mormon, An Everlasting Decree, The Threshing Floor of Faith, and others. Bruce also does requested assigned research for the general authorities in the church. Bruce has a faithful testimony of the Savior with a unique understanding of the gospel.
Because of love for all the world, God gave His only Son, that through the sacrifice of Christ, the Father's will was done. That is my testimony. Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God.
He continues his passion of scriptural research. He and his wife Margie are the parents of 10 children and 27+ grandchildren. Bruce is the perfect guide for this Holy Land tour. In his younger days he studied in Jerusalem and is a sponge for knowledge. To our surprise, Bruce Newbold once again joined us on this Holy Land tour. Not only has he memorized the scriptures, but he can quote them, making the words really move. For Julia and I, this dream team was the perfect direction for an awesome experience in the Middle East. In preparing for this trip, we had to jump through many hoops. Aside from having an up-to-date passport, travel insurance, and unique baggage for international travel, it was necessary to be fully vaccinated. We were also requested to have completed a recent booster shot for COVID. We were required to do a COVID PCR tests for Great Britain, Turkey, Israel, and Jordan. Each test needed to be done within 2 days before entering each country. Beginning this dream tour of a lifetime, we started with a flight from Salt Lake City to the Seattle International Airport. After takeoff from Salt Lake International, it was fun watching the Great Salt Lake below. During the flight, we soon connected with several people on the plane who were going on the same tour. Later we flew by Washington's majestic, snow-covered Mount Rainier before landing in Seattle. Upon arrival at the Seattle airport, our group of 17 people horrifyingly found our flight to Turkey with British Airways had been delayed 4 hours because of mechanical problems. A replacement plane had already been acquired, but it would be arriving late. What we were told next really scared us. We were then informed that having only 40 minutes to make a transfer to the next flight would be nearly impossible. Consequently, we would be stranded in England for 2 days before the next flight to Turkey would be available. Topping off the white-knuckle news, we would unfortunately and completely miss the 2-day Turkey segment of the tour. Working together, our group of 17 negotiated with British Airways to find a solution. The airlines began to realize if they could not get us onto our next connecting flight, they would have to put us up for 2 days in a hotel with meals at a huge expense to accommodate 17 stranded, unhappy people. British Airways then came up with a possible solution. If the plane to Heathrow flew just a little faster and take a more direct, but bumpy airstream course, It may be just enough time to barely make our connection flight to Turkey. Also, we later found out that British Airways went above and beyond, parking our Boeing 787 airliner in the same terminal where the Turkey flight was located. This was an uncommon move and very accommodating service for a big airline. Heathrow Airport is huge. Normally it takes people over an hour just to transfer to another terminal by shuttle bus. Upon landing at Heathrow, the captain kindly asked if the 323 passengers in the plane would let our group get off the plane first, even though we were way back in the economy part of the plane. That saved us precious time. We grabbed our carry-on and ran to the connecting gate for the Turkey flight. When arriving, the Turkish-bound plane had slightly delayed their flight to Istanbul. Gratefully and miraculously our prayers were answered. We made it. Our next flight placed us in Istanbul at 2 a.m. Tired and worn out, we went through customs and inspection and to the baggage claim. We soon found out our checked baggage didn't make the transfer. It was a good thing most of us had a change of clothing in our carry-on, as was suggested by latter-day travel.
It's a constant effort to make sure that the bag systems are operating all of the time. There are flights leaving at all hours of the day.
Arriving at our hotel, we hit the sack around 3:30 a.m. Turkey time. Our group needed to be up early at 6 a.m., dress, eat breakfast, and join the whole group of 41 people to begin our tour. We woke up in a different world. Istanbul is far different than Linden, Utah. Loading the tour bus, we drove through downtown Istanbul. Almost everyone in this big city wears a different clothing style as long as it's black. I think we stuck out like tourists from Planet Colorful. It was a degree or two below freezing, and it had recently snowed in Istanbul. Seemed like the staff at the hotel didn't know what to do with all the crusty frozen white stuff piling up everywhere. Rush hour for the Turkish population was hurriedly walking or riding buses or light rail or compact cars to work destinations. Some streets are narrow and those driving cars were parked every place imaginable. Lufti, our local guide, warned us that automobiles have the right of way, and you don't want to be found in front of one. Our bus drove past the magnificent historic Blue Mosque, the jewel of Istanbul. At a point, we got out to take pictures in front of this immense building. It was recently closed to the public due to refurbishing. The Titanic structure is another wonder of the world, complete with sky-reaching minarets. Sultan Ahmet appointed his royal architect Setefar Mehmet Aga, a pupil and senior assistant of the famous architect Mimar Sinan, to be in charge of the mosque construction. The organization of the work was described in meticulous detail in 8 volumes, now found in the library of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Opening ceremonies were held in 1617. The mosque was to be built on the site of the palace of the Byzantine emperors, facing the Hagia Sophia Church. Sultan Ahmet intended this to become the first mosque of his empire. The upper area is decorated with about 20,000 hand-painted glazed ceramics in 60 different tulip patterns. The stories below are illuminated by 200 stained glass windows. The most important element of the interior of the mosque is the mihrab, which is made of fine carvings and sculptural marble. Although one of Istanbul's most famous landmarks, it is still a working mosque and is therefore closed to tourists for 90 minutes during each prayer. About 20,000 people can worship at the mosque at a time. Hagia Sophia is an important monument in the Sultanate area of Istanbul, both for the Byzantine and Ottoman empires. For another 2.5 centuries, Hagia Sophia remained the architectural jewel of the Christian Byzantine Empire. The structure was once a Christian cathedral, and then a mosque, but then a museum. At one time in its history, the mosaics were plastered over, but were restored after the conquest of Constantinople by the Ottomans. Just recently, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced the decision, after a court annulled the site's museum status, to be a mosque once again on July 10, 2020, after 86 years. Turkish officials say Christian emblems, including mosaics of the Virgin Mary which adorn its soaring golden dome, will not be removed. Hagia Sophia was rebuilt by Emperor Justinian in 537, and had been at the center of Orthodox Christianity for 900 years. In 1453, the city was seized by the Ottomans, and for 500 years after the conquest of the Muslims, it became the Grand Mosque of the Sultans. During the Byzantine period, Hagia Sophia was decorated with beautiful mosaics, which still appear like new to this day. Mosaics include Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and a number of emperors and empresses. When the Latin Crusaders entered the city in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, many of the Byzantine buildings were sacked, with many mosaics removed and sent to Venice. Other mosaics were covered or whitewashed when the Hagia Sophia was turned into a mosque in 1453. However, during a restoration in 1846, the mosaics were uncovered. Carpets have been installed in the mosque to cover the icons during Islamic prayers, and help to have special lighting to darken the space and hide the floor icons. As we visited Hagia Sophia, we were asked to take off our shoes at the entrance to the temple. A square-tiled area not covered by carpet is the circle of the center of the world and also represents the four corners of the earth.
Just before we go in there, I want to talk about the center of the world. There's traditions in almost every single culture that the primordial mound came out of the time of creation, that there was water that covered the earth, the dry land appears in the waters of creation. That's where God stands to finish the rest of creation. That becomes a sacred site, the closest point between heaven and earth. That's where they build altars. Altars are all altars represent that primordial mound, and that's where God stands. That's the closest point between heaven and earth. That's why temples are constructed at that site. Altars are there, and temples are just constructed to maintain the sacred space around an altar, because all covenants are made at an altar or as if you are at an altar. That point is where three worlds come together: the world of the living, where we're at, the world of the dead underneath it, and the world of the gods. It's called the sixth cardinal direction. That's where time and space ceases to exist. That's why the world of the living can do work for the world of the dead and be bound in the world of the gods, because that's where those three worlds come together. It was believed that that's where every culture has that belief, and when you go inside of here, you'll see the place where the leaders would have to come to be crowned, because that's the closest point between heaven and earth.
In early days, two massive metal and wood doors were opened according to the importance of those entering the mosque.
Another thing that we're not going to be able to see is the baptistry.
Bruce Porter talked about a baptismal font inside Hagia Sophia, where early Christians performed baptism by immersion.
If you've been to Pisa or Florence or many of the other Christian cathedrals in Europe, there's a baptistry with 8 sides outside of the building. It's outside because you had to go through that baptism as an initiatory before you could come inside and be part of the congregation. That's always on the outside of the church, because you have to go through that initiatory before you can participate in the full religion. That baptistry is right here. Inside of there, we're not going to be able to go in there because it's now a mosque. But they have a gigantic baptismal font there. The Catholic Church baptized by immersion until the 15th century.
Our tour group walked down to the Hippodrome, passing a beautiful German fountain. It's just simply a fancy fountain, a gift presented to the Sultan and people of Istanbul as a token of friendship from the German Kaiser Wilhelm. The ancient Hippodrome was the center of Byzantine civic life, from political and theological controversies to chariot races and riots. Built in 203 by Emperor Septimus Severus, it is estimated that the arena could accommodate up to 100,000 spectators. Walking down the plaza is the obelisk of Tutmosis III, atop an ancient structure erected by Egyptian Emperor Theodosius in 390 AD. However, it is believed to be much older than that. It was originally made for Thutmose III, who ruled Egypt from 1479 to 1425 BC. It is the oldest monument in Istanbul and rests on 4 bronze blocks, decorated with reliefs, on a Roman base used in its transportation and re-erection. The carvings on it depict the emperor, his children and other prominent personalities portrayed in the act of watching the races from the imperial box, with spectators, musicians, dancers and chariot races at the back. A bronze serpent's column named a sultanate are being restored along with the stone obelisk of Constantine Porphyrogiatus. On the coils of the serpent's column, an inscription was written that mentioned the Greek city-states that had fought in the war. It was later converted into a fountain, and in 1702, the heads were removed, probably by a drunken diplomat. One of the serpent heads has survived, and is now in the Archaeological Museum of Istanbul. The column still stands between the other monuments, the obelisk of Theodosius, the Porphyrius monuments, and the obelisk of Constantine Porphyrogenitus. The group walked to Naka's Oriental rugs and textiles. A woman was showing how a rug was handmade from Turkish silk.
Which is about like 700 yards. Yeah, when you unravel it, feels like horsetail. Now what we are looking at is 100% pure silk carpet. The skeleton, the warp and the web, is pure silk, and the knots she ties into the skeleton also comes in silk threads. She has to memorize every color where they go in the pattern, not by color by color. Now what you're looking at right now before your eyes is the part of the pattern, which is going to be a tree of life with the birds of paradise, and she has to tie 100 knots per centimeter square, which is roughly 645 per inch square. It's going to be in the size of 3 feet by 5 feet, and it's going to take approximately 11 months of her time. At the end of each row, she never does one pattern at once. She goes like a typewriter, left to right, right to left, like crochet. And she does put the right color at the right place so her pattern appears. Now, at the end of each row, with the help of this heavy iron comb, she will beat the pile down to form them more. Vur ablacığım. And then she will trim the ends of the knots. Kiss me. Now, silk rugs in the old times were specifically made for the royal family members, the Sultan, his palaces, and regular people like us, we were not allowed to own them. We create rugs in different corners of Turkey. We have a little over 2,300 ladies working for us, and we make rugs and sell it to other rug stores. So, but when you come to Turkey, you like it or not, one way or another, you end up in a rug store. The important thing is, try to learn this unfortunately dying form of art from a reliable source. Because, you know, sometimes...
So it is a dying tradition?
Well, ma'am, I mean, in the 21st century, you cannot teach this to younger generation people. They rather spend time in front of tablets, Facebook, Instagram, rather than spending 11 months in front of a loop.
The group was shown in a sales display of Turkish rugs with descriptions of each fabric types. These rugs are loomed by families living in the Turkish countryside and sell them to the Naka's company. The rugs are prized all over the world and are claimed to be more resilient to wear than many other Oriental rugs, lasting generations.
Now, the magical part of it, bir de renk yapalım. My boys are going to rotate the rug before your eyes, and it's going to have that magical change.
Oh my God. Yes. Oh my goodness.
Bir de yan tarafları şuralarda gösterelim. For my sideline audiences. It's the reflection of the light. Every handmade rug has a nap, and it's the reflection of the light of the nap.
Rugs are made from Turkish silk, wool, and cotton.
Now, who's going to be the first one to jump and touch? Please do so. Please do so.
A few in our group purchased rugs.
Something that you liked way underneath. Try to remember the place. And then my friends will be here. But that's, a lot of the time, that's a favorite of a lot of people.
What's it made out of?
Pure cotton, mercerized cotton. It's a finer thread than wool.
One rug caught our eye and was woven by a family in the eastern mountain land of Turkey.
It's tribal, but beautiful. From mountains of Mediterranean, this one is coming from.
Soon after returning home from the Holy Land tour, we got a surprise. Turkish men making deliveries from Turkey delivered our rug in person. The tour group enjoyed a Turkish cuisine-type lunch at the Tamara restaurant. Cost was $12 per person. US currency is often accepted in businesses in Turkey. While we were in Turkey, money in Turkish lira was $0.068 to $1, or roughly close to 2/3 of a dollar. Driving in Istanbul is pretty much rush hour, almost all the time. Constant honking and jostling is going on. Many streets in Istanbul are narrow and crowded. Some streets are paved with granite block cobblestones or slabs of stone, especially in historic areas. In the late evening, the streets are ghostly empty. The tour included sightseeing around the Bosphorus Strait and Black Sea. We experienced a 3-hour cruise, beginning in the coastal part of the historic city. The strait passes between the European and Asian continents, sailing by Ortaköy, Kukuksa Palace, and Rumeli Fortress. Many Russian and European wealthy come to stay at the resorts and coastal side residences. A collection of mosques can be seen from the strait as we loop down the waterway and back again. Water-loving birds are abundant because of the bounteous fish and sea life. We were surprised to see a Turkish military submarine on the strait. With the recent war in Ukraine, the Turkish government was banning Russian military shipping. Istanbul recently built a brand new broadcasting radio and television spire on one of the highest hills, towering over metropolis Istanbul. At 1,211 feet high with its tip standing 1914.37 feet above sea level, it is the highest point in the city. Situated in the coastal Üsküdar district on the city's Asian side, the Camlika Tower features observation decks and restaurants for visitors. The project was finalized at the cost of US $121.7 million, or 381.8 million Turkish liras. Tucked away on a terrace above the bustle of the Spice Bazaar, is the Rustam Pasha Mosque, Rustam Pasha Camii. It's an Istanbul hidden gem. The small space, designed by renowned Ottoman architect Mimar Sinan, is covered in colorful red and blue Iznik tiles, in floral and geometric designs. Some consider it a miniature blue mosque, but without the crowds. Colorful tiles date to 1555, and are still bright as from the days they were first glazed. Sinan's architecture is known for emphasizing the structure of his buildings over the internal aesthetics, such as the tiling. No other mosque makes such a lavish use of Iznik tiles. A later mosque, Sinan, used tiles more sparingly. A short stroll from the Grand Bazaar, within the Faith District, is the 17th century Egyptian-type Spice Bazaar. This bustling bazaar is open 7 days per week. It's another most loved of the photographers and keepsake-looking visitors. Clamoring gastronomic heaven since 1664, this is the best spot to get dried foods grown from the ground. Spice flavors, olives, Turkish joy, oils and substances are of the best quality. Bronze knickknacks glimmer in the light, torpedo-sized dates are stacked to the rafters, and the debauched fragrance of newly ground Mehmet Efendi espresso converges with the smell of crisp fish. There are so many businesses packed into such a small area that a single street or even a single building can be the center of thousands of products. Colors in these shops are popping eye candy for visitors. We try to return to our hotel in the middle of Istanbul's rush hour. It makes rush hour back in the States a stroll in the park by comparison. After unsuccessful attempts to land us at the hotel, we were resigned to walk a few blocks. It was interesting being part of a Turkish rush hour in a cold evening. Arriving, a Turkish cuisine dinner was served and ready for tired but hungry pilgrims.
And I've worked with Lufti over the years and wandered the streets and walked the streets by myself waiting between tours. So but we're going to have a great day. Every day gets better. I promise you, every day gets better. And not that it's the wrong foot to start out on. This is a great city. It's got a history that won't end. It is the center of Christianity after the time of Christ. All the Jewish converts from the time of Christ, from Christ's teaching, all moved into Turkey to get out of Israel because the enemy were the non-Jewish Christians. And so all of the 7 churches that John talks about in the book of Revelation were all here in Turkey. So this becomes really a Christian center.
Today we fly to Denizli, Turkey. Our Turkish guide, Lufti, performed a miracle, helping 17 of our group to get our luggage back. It didn't arrive in Turkey upon our arrival 2 days ago, being the plane was late and we barely had enough time to catch our flight to Istanbul. Lufti tirelessly worked with the Turkish airport staff. We found our way back into curious places to meet security and gatekeeper personnel. It was a huge relief to find our luggage intact.
Did you get him?
Our group then had to run the luggage again through security X-ray scanners. With my luggage, the security people saw something on the X-ray scan they became suspicious of. They had me open my suitcase and found my vitamins. Suspecting a drug dealer, they kept asking what the pills and powder was all about. I kept saying vitamins and supplements. The 2 concerned Turkish security officers still didn't understand what I was saying. Finally, Julia came over and said they are medicine for his cancer. Then they understood and let me collect my things and released my luggage. This was the only time there was a concern about my vitamin supplements in all other scans since we came on the tour. The tour took a short flight from the Istanbul airport to Denizli, Turkey. It's a small airport similar to Provo's. We gather our baggage and headed out once again. We stayed that night at the Ramada Kusadasi Termin Resort. The next morning we took our tour bus to Pamukkale through Turkey countryside. The typography and vegetation reminded us of northern Utah. Passing mosques, a marble manufacturing business, and a headquarters for Virginia's Secret, our tour stopped at Pamukkale. At the lower area of Pamukkale, Turkey, we viewed a hillside of white gypsum calcium material with hot water pouring over it. It reminded me of Yellowstone National Park. A small lake pond was featured below with ducks and geese. Julia found a friendly feral cat that wanted some attention. Busing to the top of Pamukkale Hill, we discovered geothermal pools and thermal features. These thermal works have been running for centuries, even beyond ancient Roman times. It's one of the most beautiful sights in the world. The ancient Romans certainly took advantage of the hot water for their building heating systems and baths. As the natural thermal waters were long believed to have curative properties, Pamukkale, Hierapolis quickly grew into a prosperous city with a population of around 100,000. The city is called by 2 names. Pamukkale in Turkish means cotton castle, and the Greek, Hierapolis, means holy city. The tour group passed through the entrance gate where birds were nesting in the terracotta roofing. If you build it, they will come. Pamukkale Hierapolis was officially founded in 190 BC by King Eumenes II of Pergamon, a member of the Attalid dynasty. Several decades later, Hierapolis, like most of Anatolia, was officially ceded to Rome. After two major earthquakes in the 1st century AD, the city was largely rebuilt in the 3rd century. Later on, Hierapolis would become an important center of early Christianity. Ironically, it was the place where Saint Philip was martyred. Hierapolis remained largely forgotten for centuries until being rediscovered by Western travelers in the 1700s. Hierapolis city ruins, apart from the partially restored theater of Hierapolis, required some imagination, but in a sense of history. The Roman city developed intricate plumbing systems of pipes and culverts. Traveling further in our bus through the countryside, we came upon Laodicea. During its day, this city became one of the greatest commercial and financial centers of the Roman Empire. Inhabitants were very wealthy. The city had an earthquake. The Roman emperor wanted to help, but the people said they could take care of itself and didn't need any help from men or heaven. Pride existed here.
They said we can do it ourselves, and that's one of the concepts that's talked about in the book of Revelation. The Lord through John says, you think you have enough, but you're nothing, you're no more than dirt. You don't know what you're doing. You have nothing. And he says you need to rely on me, and that's one of the aspects of Laodicea, was the pride that existed here. One of the important things is where he says, I would that you were hot or cold, but because you're lukewarm, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth. Well, that word spew in the Greek means to vomit. I'm going to throw you up. It's translated spew, but it means vomit. So he says, because you're lukewarm, because you're not cold, he says, I would that you were cold or you were hot. But because you're not, you're trying to live in both worlds. There's two churches, the church of the Lamb of God and the church of the devil. You're in one of them. You're either serving God or you're serving mammon. You can't have one foot in Zion and another one in Babylon. Christ says you're either for me or you're against me. It's just one or the other. You're trying to live in both worlds. You're trying to consider yourselves righteous and spiritual and then live like the rest of the world. He says you can't do that. You got to make a choice.
In the early centuries, Laodicea established evidence that the inhabitants accepted Christianity and performed baptism by immersion. The person being baptized went down the steps into the pool, where a priest performed the baptism. The ordinance was witnessed by two clerks on the south and north cross arms of the font. Driving toward Mary's home, the mother of Jesus, we viewed the Turkish country and cities such as Kuzadashi, Turkey along the way. We travel along the Mediterranean coast. The farming in Turkey has adopted agriculture method of using plastic covered in row-like greenhouses for raising vegetables. This method helps keep out insects and birds, using fewer insecticides, and greatly preserves water use in this dry region. It's estimated the covered agriculture has helped with a 78% increase in yield. Olives are an important product in Mediterranean states. Every meal we ate in Turkey, Israel and Jordan has green and purple olives, dates and sometimes figs on the menu. People in the Middle East live in multi-family dwellings, especially in the populated cities. Families will have generations combined in floor levels. Family generations do not usually live far from their roots. While dwellings look very old, others were built more recent. The Muslim faith discourages their people from going into debt. So a family will build partially, and when they earn enough money, continue to add on to the home. So even though dwellings seem to be abandoned, they are not. Unfinished buildings are scattered amongst newly finished structures throughout countries of the Middle East. Our tour bus climbs the hills of the Selçuk countryside, not far from the coastal city of Ephesus. We climb Mount Bulbul, deemed holy by Christians. Due to its strategic geographical position, during the spreading of Christianity, Ephesus was one of the first 7 established churches as written in the New Testament. Mary's house is sitting on the side of Mount Bulbul, 4.3 miles from the city of Ephesus. Mary with her family and John the Beloved migrated here for safety from Jewish persecution in Israel. visitors tour the home but photos are not allowed inside. The house became a pilgrimage spot accredited by all of the Christian world, with Vatican declaring it so. Since then, several popes have made pilgrimages to Mary's house. Most recently, Pope Francis visited the House of Mary, November 2014, and Pope Benedictus XVI in 2006. A spring used for holy water is along the path leaving the house. There is also a wishing wall where visitors leave prayer notes. As we return to the bus, we once again visit shops selling ornate souvenirs. Many people may be surprised that Muslims love both Jesus and Mary, his mother. In the Quran, no woman is given more attention than Mary, being one of only 8 individuals who have a chapter named after them. Ephesus was established as a port and used to be a most important commercial center. It played a central role in the ancient times with its strategic location. Ephesus is located on a very fertile valley. The early bay port for shipping has silted in from those early days. As shown in the Bible, it's a religious center in Turkey for early Christianity. It's also an important tourism destination today. In his missionary travels, Apostle Paul spent time with the Christian community in Ephesus. He preached the gospel, and many were converted. At one point, the Christian converts became so converted that they abandoned and burned 50,000 pieces of magic books and manuscripts. Because of the size and dedication of the Ephesian church, it became a threat to the idol-making industry in Ephesus. Paul's writings state a reaction from the non-Christians. Quote,
"And about that time there arose a great commotion about the way. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation, and said, 'Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands.' So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship." Now when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians."
This caused a riot in the city. Because of the outrage, Paul was brought to the great theater of Ephesus, where he was judged and found guilty of not respecting the goddess Artemis and Diana. He was imprisoned and forced to leave the city. Tours to the ruins of Ephesus is impressive, and is one of the most visited of sites in Turkey. As we walk the main road, the majestic architecture becomes apparent for its time. Chariots traveled the stone path, but stopped at the end where the main library was located. The amphitheater was also restored. It was a possible place where the Apostle Paul taught. Public Roman baths are part of the city. Roman walkways of large marble stones paved the street. Grooves were chiseled into the smooth stones so the horses would not slip. Impressive stone sculptures are everywhere. The carved motifs are impressive. One has to wonder what tools were used to carve them so elegantly. Roman writings are chiseled into stone blocks. Intricate mosaic tile floors have been uncovered with colors as bright as when they were created. Temples of their gods adorn the streets. Around 300 AD, Roman statues of emperors Hadrian, Diocletian, Constantius, Maximianus and Theodosius are erected. Inscribed bases for these are preserved. Even a fascinating outdoor public privy was found and restored. The most impressive and famous structure is the library at the end of the roadway. It's adorned with statues. Celsus Library is one of the most beautiful structures in Ephesus and was the third largest library in the Roman world behind only Alexandria and Pergamum. It was believed to have held around 12,000 scrolls. Celsus Library was the work of the famous Roman architect Vitruvius and built in 135 AD. Inside are ornate decorations on the top floor of granite and marble. The library actually has 3 floors, although it looks like 2 floors from the outside. The Great Theatre was constructed during the 3rd to 1st century BC. In the Roman period, there was an extensive rebuilding under Emperors Domitian and Trajan. In addition to theater performance, assemblies also took place there. A large agora area located away from the main road is where games were probably played or locations for gatherings. Restoration of Ephesus began in 1900. Archaeology is still being accomplished to this day. Evening concerts are often performed in Ephesus at the Great Theatre, like this historic concert in 2001 with Elton John.
In a row, with eyes like ice on fire, the human heart a captive in the snow.
One surprising and peculiar thing about Ephesus is cats. Yes, cats. There is literally close to 100 kitty cats roaming around the structure stones and ancient columns. In fact, one cat is well known to the guides in Ephesus. He is named Garfield. These feral cats are not wild but somewhat domesticated. They like people. These little homesteaders will come up and beg for a petting and a treat. Not only do you find cats in Ephesus, but also in Petra, Jordan and Pamukkale, Turkey. It seems they thrive making friends with tourists who give them attention and feed them. They almost emulate a reverence similar to the sacred cattle in India. After Ephesus, the tour drove 5 miles to the Basilica of St. John, located in the charming town of Suchuk. The Byzantine fortress share the peak and still dominate both the town and the surrounding countryside. Construction of the church began in 548 AD and was completed by 565. The building was one of the largest and most ornate basilicas in the Byzantine world, until it was razed by Tamerlane's Mongols over 600 years ago in 1402. Modern restoration works, mainly in red brick, has been carried out by the University of Pamukkale and a few U.S. foundations. It gives some idea of the extent and the majesty of this holy site. The architecture symbolically follows the plan of the Jewish Solomon Temple, as Bruce Porter explains.
Again, it's where the 3 worlds come together in the sanctuary, and in this one it's in the center. See how this creates a cross? Basilicas are crosses. Like the Temple of Solomon, you would come down, see you've got 2 cubes right here, 2 cubes, there's 2 cubes right here in this holy area, in the what's called the holy place, and then you have 1 cube right here in the sanctuary. And then you would have, then the Temple of Solomon went out, and that's what this walkway is over here on this side, and this one on this side. The Temple of Solomon, it was tall in the center, and then it went out a little bit over a smaller section. The baptistry in the Temple of Solomon, if you remember, the laver on the 12 oxen was on the outside, on the east side of the Temple of Solomon. You have the baptistry right here, separate from the church, because that is the path, that's the gate, remember? See this 8-sided thing, the building right here? That 8 sides represents the baptistry. And just as it says there in Nephi, as he talks about the baptism of Christ, he says baptism is the gate. That's the doorway. That's what you have to do before you come into and participate in the gospel. The center of the cross, where this cross comes together, the center point, that cross, that square, that becomes the most sacred spot where the 3 worlds come together. The world of the living, in which we're in, the world of the dead, and it's believed that John's grave is directly below it. In St. Peter's in Rome, Peter's grave is directly below the columns and the canopy that's there in St. Peter's. So that becomes that sacred spot, because that's where the world of the living can do work for the world of the dead that will be binding in the world of the gods. Our temples are same way. That's where the three worlds come together and where time and space ceases to exist. So.
As legend goes, Apostle John continued preaching in Ephesus into his 90s. His sermons were a staple of Christian teachings. Opposing traditions say that Apostle John the Beloved died on the Isle of Patmos, where he was exiled as a result of anti-Christian persecution under the Roman Emperor Domitian. Others say he was buried in a tomb in the same place where the Basilica was built. Tertullian, in his writings, in The Prescription of Heretics, John was plunged into boiling oil, but miraculously escaped unscathed. But we learn from the Book of Mormon that John never tasted of death, and is a translated being. He is still on the earth, doing work as he originally desired, fulfilling a wish given to him by the Savior.
Yes. Be obliged, sir. Thank you kindly.
As quickly as he had arrived, the man in the gray tweed suit was gone.
Bruce also talked about the eight-sided symbol of Melchizedek, found in many of the early Christian and Muslim structures.
8 is also symbolizing its eternal,
8 is always a new beginning.
A new beginning.
8 is a new beginning. There's 8 notes on the piano. You have this 8th day. Christianity begins. The new Sabbath becomes the 8th day. Christ rises on the 8th day, not the 7th day. There's multiple symbolisms, and 8 days creates an 8-pointed star, 2 squares. 2 squares intersecting together on an angle, which this makes, is what's called, what Joseph Smith said, is the sign of Melchizedek. It's common throughout the Middle East, and especially in the Muslim countries, a square and then the other one offset 90 degrees. And so this creates the same thing. If you take that point in the center of each one of these apses, or in each one of these curves, if you take that center, that makes one square. You see how that makes a square if you go to this one and that one. Well, if you take the other one and do the opposite ones, the alternative ones, then it creates a square inside of a square. Anybody familiar with the San Diego Temple?
Yeah.
San Diego Temple is, when that was built, I was teaching at UCSD. I was the institute director there at La Jolla. I was asked to be the doctrinal consultant on the temple committee for that temple. But the architect came to my office there. He told me, I remember him saying, well, I got a stack of papers like this. I've researched on temples and symbols temples. Well, I pointed him over to the 4 file cabinets I had, and I said, I have 16 drawers on temples right there. So he came to my office 3 or 4 times to help in the symbolic design of the San Diego Temple. Well, the San Diego Temple is almost totally square in a square. Everywhere you go, it's a square in a square.
On March 16th, our group flew back to the Istanbul airport. Arriving, we ate lunch in the large food court. Some of us ate at a Turkish Burger King. Everything looks like back home, but the prices were in lira. Fortunately, they took Visa credit cards. Soon we made our way to the gate for the plane to Tel Aviv. We had already gone through international baggage checks. Israel does not fully trust Turkish security, so we had to take our carry-on through one more security check. Being extra vigilant to terror threats, this check required the officers going through all luggage piece by piece. They were very thorough, as you can see with Julia being security scanned. After sitting down, our carry-on was weighed. If over the weight limit, a cost was charged. Not sure what that limit was, but most of us were okay. Before long, we boarded the plane to Tel Aviv, Israel. The 3-hour flight was into the evening. Some watched out the plane windows to see the bright lights of the city. Arriving at the flight gate, we walked down the air stairs to the tarmac, like in the early days of flying. A couple of buses took us to the entrance to the terminal. Next, we went to passport control to pick up our visas. The day before, we filled out an entrance document that was needed for admittance. After passing that step, we walked over to pick up our checked luggage. Next, our group headed for COVID PCR testing. The Israeli health tech swabbed using a tip in the mouth and then both nostrils of the nose. Results were available the next day. Finally, we met our new guide, Saeed, and boarded our bus. Our bus driver was an amazing driver, squeezing the large tour bus around the tiny streets. Unbeknown to us, we had a security guard along with us on the bus also. This is a requirement in Israel. Israel is hyper-vigilant about security, as you may expect, knowing historical events. Tel Aviv is a modern city with the oldest buildings back to 1950.